Welcome to our morning show today from WRCA Radio. Joining us in the studio, Tony Kurtz is back this month, a Wisconsin State Assembly member representing the 41st Assembly District, and Howard Marklein representing the 17th Senate District are here, both of here today. Either of you have any Irish background or not? Tony?
Well, good morning. I do not.
No?
My lovely wife has some.
Oh, okay.
Some Irish.
Howard?
Peggy is half Irish.
Oh, okay. That explains a lot.
Yeah. So she's half German, half Irish. So we have some interesting debates sometimes on how things are going in her life, and sometimes some of the issues she has. And if she's stubborn, I say, well, it's got to be the Irish. And I'm not sure she agrees with that.
You were at a St. Patrick's parade the other day, weren't you, Howard?
Yes, on Saturday in Prairie du Chien. Big parade, gosh. Considering it was cold. And in fact, it started out reasonably comfortable, I guess, and boy, the temperature dropped from the beginning of the parade and to the end of the parade, and but it was good. A lot of people, a lot of families, a lot of kids out. It was a great turnout. So happy I was there. But I was glad to jump back in the car and after walking the parade.
Warm up. Yeah. You were at the Lincoln Day dinner the other night, weren't you, Tony?
I was there on Saturday afternoon and then Saturday night, and then I went over to Reedsburg because they have a South Central Irish club over there, and I presented the Irishman of the Year and the Irish Rose of the Year there in Reedsburg in the evening. So I had a busy day on Saturday.
Irishman of the Year, that's quite a distinction there. Eh?
It was, yes, Irishman of the Year and Irish Rose of the Year. So,
that's beautiful.
Yeah, it was pretty neat.
I've attended that in the past, and it's a fun evening. It really is.
Really
and
is.
There's some number of Irish people in the area, and they're very proud of their heritage.
No doubt, as they should be.
Yeah.
Last time you were here, you were talking about, you were just toured the campus. I knew you were going to get a chance to talk to Mr. Rothman. Have you had a chance to meet?
We did. We actually had a meeting with Mr. Rothman, UW Assistant President, a few days later. We shared a lot of the photos that I took and some of the things we would like to see them do moving forward. They have talked to the county board, court counsel, and they're working through a couple things to see what they can do to try to alleviate the issue out there. And then this morning I did have breakfast with Dave Turk and a couple other county board members, and so we'll see what happens. They're in the process of talking to UW and see how if they can revisit kind of what was done out there with all the items that were left behind.
Mm-hmm. Howard, have you heard anything as far as that?
I have not. I did speak last week with Jay Rothman, and the conversation was more kind of big picture in terms of what the budget asks for the in-state budget. So we didn't talk about anything, I guess, specifically related to the campus here, but as more big picture, what their funding, what he says their funding needs are in the budget.
Speaking of the budget, last time you were here, we were talking about what might be. Now we kind of know what it looks like. Can you give us a little bit of an update?
Well, in some respects, we do. I will say we are still waiting for two Supreme Court decisions. One, these are state Supreme Court decisions. One is on the 400-year veto of the school spending increase, the per pupil spending increase. And so, that case was heard already. The Supreme Court hasn't issued their opinion. It could come anytime, or it could be as late as June, probably. I think usually the Supreme Court issues their final opinions by like the end of June. So, and the relevance to the budget is that K-12 spending is the number one expenditure in our state budget. Okay. So depending on what the Supreme Court rules, we don't know at this point what the biggest expenditure in the state budget could be. So I think that we're going to probably have to wait until that Supreme Court decision comes to we know what they say about the K-12 per pupil increase. So that's one case. The other case that is before the court is the literacy bill. This has to do with the governor line item vetoed a bill that was not an appropriation bill. And the governor in our Constitution, he says he can line item veto appropriations, but this bill didn't have any appropriations in it. That case has wound its way up to the state Supreme Court, and they will hear oral arguments at the Supreme Court on April 3rd on that case. So, and again, the relevance there is we have to kind of know what is an appropriation bill and what isn't, as we develop the budget. So, apologize for the long answer, but I mean, at this point, there's still a whole lot of uncertainty. There was uncertainty a couple months ago, and I'm asked often about, the budget process and, when do you see it getting done? And I wish I knew. Once these two Supreme Court decisions are handed down, we'll have a much better idea of what the framework could be for the budget this year. So we do have, I think we'll be announcing probably tomorrow, we're going to be doing 4 public hearings around the state. And so we'll be announcing those, I believe, tomorrow, likely in Milwaukee area, Green Bay area, Northwest Wisconsin, and Central Wisconsin will be the 4 locations for the public hearings on the budget. So for that'll happen for sure to collect public input on the budget. So, but we're still doing a lot of work, and I know both the Senate and the Assembly kind of looking at, and we're hearing from a lot of people. I mean, if you look at my calendar, it's just full of meetings with people advocating for spending in their areas.
Yeah, one of the things, in fact, as co-chair of the Joint Finance Committee, you get quoted quite a bit in the state media, but one of the things was the governor proposing helping out the prison system, things like that. And it was another thing that I know you were kind of at least talking a little bit against that, Howard.
Well, I tell you, actually, no, I'm supportive of, we need to do something with Waupun and Green Bay, okay? Those, I think Green Bay was built in the late 1800s. I mean, it's an archaic facility. And Waupun isn't much better. And they're inefficient to run, to operate. And I think because of the physical conditions of those 2 institutions, the morale there is not good. And we've got in Boston, I've got 3 prisons in my district, and closest to here being Boscobel. And Boscobel has some pretty serious offenders in that facility. But Boscobel's a newer facility, and they've made some additions to it and some enhancements. And anyway, and right now the vacancy rate in Boscobel is almost non-existent, okay, which is great, because it wasn't too long ago that these officers were getting slammed, having to work additional shifts, and it was just it was terrible for their personal lives and stuff. So, but we talked about in the last budget, we talked about putting some money aside for a new facility to replace Green Bay and Waupun, and we kicked around. This is all done, not just conversations between the Assembly and Senate. We kicked around the idea of putting like $600 million aside towards a facility that would replace those 2 aging facilities. And make a long story short, there was concerns about that line item veto. The governor could line item veto that and redirect it to other areas. So that didn't happen. So I would be supportive of us facing the reality that we need to replace Green Bay and Waupun. I'm a little concerned with the proposal that some inmates at those facilities would be released, because what would be happening is, as they were doing this renovation project in Waupun, there would be quite a few people that would be just released into the public. I'm just concerned about public safety.
Tony, would you like to chime in on anything we've talked about so far?
Well, I want to go back to a little bit about the timeline of the budget. I mean, obviously, we're going to do listening sessions around the state, but we'll also do agency briefings. And so the timeline of the budget is going to look like what we've done in years past. But to Howard's point, there is a point in the budget process. Obviously, we want to get everything done by the 1st of July is the goal, because that's the end of the fiscal year, the budget year. But, on the 400-year veto, that's the one we really needed a decision on sooner rather than later. So we'll go through the process. We'll go through everything, but at the end of the day, it's going to come down to a court decision. But I do want to emphasize something about the partial veto. Historically speaking, it doesn't matter, Republican governor or a Democrat governor, they've always kind of followed the law and only did a line item veto in a Chapter 20 bill. A Chapter 20 is an appropriation bill, i.e. the state budget. By doing what Governor Evers did with it was Act 20 is the bill that he went in and actually partial vetoed. That's a whole new ballgame, because once again, Republican governors have never done that in the past, nor has other Democrat governors in the past. So this is going to be unique on the court case to see which way they side, because once again, that's going to affect how we legislate moving forward. Budget bill, that's an appropriation bill. The governor, Republican, Democrat, can definitely do the line item veto. This one was an exception to the rule, and so that's why we have to kind of know about that. But the one thing about the governor's budget that he introduced, we're going to, I think this week, Fiscal Bureau will do their final scoring. In other words, we'll get the full 1,900-page budget to see all the little ins and outs and really what it's cost. But just preliminary, it would increase state spending by about 20%. I think the vast majority of people don't think we need to increase our spending by 20%. You don't do your household spending by 20%. So that's something, obviously, we're going to look at. Also, the workforce, it's interesting. Part of his budget is also going to increase almost over 800, well, it's actually 1,300 GPR, general purpose positions. Once again, I think the vast majority of the public doesn't think we necessarily need to increase 1,300 more state workers. So those are the things that we're going to look at, and I'm not saying there's not certain places we need to increase staff, but I think across the board we're not going to increase like 1,300. So those are the things. I just want to get back to when we start the budget process, we're going to build from our previous budget, and that's what we've been doing for the last 3 budgets. And is a document that we agreed on, Republicans and Democrats, and that's going to be our base budget moving forward as we start the new budget process.
Mm-hmm. You talked about the court cases. Any idea of the timeline or anything like that, Howard?
I wish I knew. I mean, we, as Tony said, I mean, the 400-year veto, that is one that, probably has more immediate impact to us, and so, and even in how we draft, how they draft the bill, because, and the way the governor, this is almost 2 years ago now, he line item vetoed some digits, okay, so that, and that's how we got to this 400 years. He was very creative. So, like, if we were going to put in the budget the year 2027, can you write in 2027, or do you now have to write out the words 2027? Okay, I mean, seriously, it's we don't know what that looks like. So, but we definitely need guidance. So, we're going to keep Joint Finance Committee will keep doing what we can. Generally, we do not do anything real substantive until about May 15th, and I'd say about as far as any big agencies, budgets, and that sort of thing. And the reason that we wait till about then is that around May 15th, middle of May, the legislature receives the updated revenue numbers, the estimates from the nonpartisan Legislative Fiscal Bureau. So they recalculate the numbers, and we don't want to start anything big as far as any budget decisions, and then find out, oh gosh, we got we don't have enough money or we got more money? You know what I mean? So we wait till about May 15th. Now we may do some smaller agencies and a few, smaller, we had agencies that asked for $7,000. Well, 7,000 probably, whatever happens on May 15th isn't going to matter for that kind of an expenditure. So, yeah, and I, again on the governor's budget, I guess I just emphasize his budget was 1,900 and some pages long, just full of policy and all kinds of policy, and to me, the budget should be a budget, not a policy document. And he's pretty much made it a policy document. So, if you want to legalize marijuana, that should be a separate bill, not tucked into the budget someplace. That ought to be debated, separate legislation, go through the committee process and debated in the light of day, not tucked into a 1,900-page document. So, I think the last budget that we did was 183 pages long. So, it went from about the same number, 1,900 or so pages, down to 183. And my guess is we'll probably be kind of along a similar trajectory this time.
Mm-hmm. I think when you're talking about that, I think about some of these attack ads, during the political season, things that are tucked in there. Lots of times they'll accuse somebody, they voted for this. Well, they did because it was thrown in line, right?
Well, it's the devil's in the details,
right?
And that's where, and to be fair, I think as a state we actually do a fairly good job. When it goes through the committee process and the budget process, we can break those areas out. And if we have to run a standalone bill on something that's controversial, we can do that. So I think honestly, I think we actually do. I think more at the federal level, they get some of those what they call poison pills, where somebody might have something in there they just absolutely positively can't support. I do want to go back to the prisons. I actually met, and I know Howard's already have met with the new interim Department of Corrections secretary, and we've had good conversations about, what does the footprint look like. And if any of your listeners have ever seen the movie Shawshank Redemption, it was a very popular movie a couple years, probably several decades ago. But the two prisons that we're talking about, Green Bay and Waupun, were built in the late 1800s. And the best analogy I can give to folks is they literally have the same design as the prison in Shawshank Redemption. And so if that kind of tells you what our correctional officers have to deal with, there is a need to replace those two prisons. And it's interesting, the bed capacity at one is 800, the other one has about a 900, so it's about 1,700 beds. I know the governor is on a mantra, he doesn't want to add new beds, but if you got rid of Green Bay and Waupun, we just build a new prison with the same bed capacity. I think at least on the Assembly side of the House, on the Republican side, we would be more than happy to do something like that, because I think in the long run it's going to be safer for our correctional staff, and to be fair, it's also safer for our inmates, because we have lost some inmates at Waupun over the years. We just had, so I think I've talked about this a lot with our constituents in the area. They understand the need. They understand how things can age, and I think there is a will statewide to actually do something for a change and get this fixed.
I already know among your priorities for the session, you talked about providing quality education. So maybe you could talk about that. What are some of your visions for quality education?
Well, I'm obviously very concerned, with what's coming out of our schools and stuff. And we're going to be on the floor tomorrow. The Senate will be on the floor tomorrow. And one of the bills we're going to be taking up is the school accountability, the cut scores. And what happened there last summer was the Department of Public Instruction unilaterally changed the cut scores for how our schools are graded, okay, and the test scores of our students. So, and I heard a lot from some of our local district administrators about that. They were not consulted on this. It was a decision made by the DPI superintendent, and very concerned about it, because a lot of these, the administrators I talk to, they want their kids in their schools to be performing at a very, very high level. And so there's a perception out there, and I think it's probably a valid one, that these cut scores, they had the effect of making some of our schools probably look better than what they would have looked using historical standards. So the other thing is we lose comparability. Anytime you change the grading metrics for the schools, you lose that comparability. So and for a lot of parents, I think they want to kind of look at the trends. What's my local school district doing in terms of reading and math scores over the last number of years? So that would be something I know that I think we'll be taking that up tomorrow on the floor, and hopefully, and then as it relates to K-12 funding, obviously we mentioned that's going to be a Supreme Court decision. We need to wait and see what happens there, and we'll go from there. The number one expenditure in our budget is K-12 expenditures. It has been, and it will be in the future.
Tony?
Well, the right before, all our students were graded on a national, and if for reading or writing, it was a federal standard. And that way, you could compare states once again. But when they lowered the standards, and they literally lowered the standards, and so you couldn't compare. It wasn't a standard they had in other states. It wasn't a federal standard, and so you couldn't compare how we were doing in reading and math compared to other states. And so, and once again, I want to make sure I emphasize this to your listeners. This is not something the Assembly passed this a few weeks ago, where basically all we're saying is let's go back to the federal standard that we were at before. And interesting enough, when Governor Evers was the state superintendent, that was a standard that he put in place as the DPI secretary, and even he has called these lowering the standards or going to this new. It was even disappointing for him. And like I said, I'm not putting words. That's what he said. He said it was disappointing. So I think just getting back to the federal standard is what we need to do. You and I were talking before we came on air. Obviously during COVID there was learning loss, and in our school districts, to their credit, they have done a tremendous job to try to catch up with that. But now they can't compare where they're at. They can't see how the progression they're doing by lowering the standards that we did. So once again, what we did in the Assembly, and I know the Senate's going to take that up tomorrow, and I sure hope the governor will sign it. All we're saying is let's go back to the standards we had in the past, which were the federal standards. They were very easy to comply with, and once again, we could have a good benchmark for our reading and writing scores.
Mm-hmm. We hear lots and lots about the surplus in the state as well. We've talked about that before, Howard.
Yeah, and again, the surplus is still around a little north of $4 billion. And the caution that I always try to express is that a lot of that surplus is one-time money that resulted from the incredible inflationary impact that we had post-COVID. Okay, and a lot of federal money came in. Almost $67 billion came in collectively to the state of Wisconsin, to individuals, PPP loans to businesses. The governor got $2.5 billion. A lot of money went to our schools, et cetera. So that worked its way through the system, and it generated inflation, certainly. And what happened was, when the cost of a truck went up 10%, the state of Wisconsin makes more money because we get sales taxes based on the price. So the cost of a hamburger went up. We got more money and stuff. So anyway, but it's one-time money, and so we need to be cautious. And as we start putting the budget together, and what I hope we do, and we did this last budget, is matching one-time surplus with one-time investments. Okay, and last time around we took a chunk of money, we put it into roads. We paid for buildings, new buildings on campuses and that sort of thing. Instead of borrowing money, which was the norm in the past, we paid cash for it because we had cash. We paid down $400 million of debt. So again, we used that one-time surplus for one-time investments, and I suspect that we will be looking at doing a similar thing, this time around. So another thing that I always want to emphasize is three numbers, and these are when I say revenue, I'm talking taxes. That's income taxes. That's the number one source of income taxes, sales tax, and corporate taxes, as well as some other miscellaneous taxes. But the current year that we're in right now, which ends on June 30th, our revenue, our taxes, are projected to go up by 4.3%, which is pretty healthy increase in tax collections. Now, that is largely due to, if you look at sales tax, it's pretty much the rate of inflation, a couple percent, so it's not a lot there. A lot of it has to do with the stock market being up, capital gains tax, collections are projected to be up, drive that quite a bit. If you look at the next 2 years, though, the first year of the next biennium would end on June 30th, 2026. That's projected to be 3.4%. And then the following year, 1.4%. So, you look at the 3 years in a row, 4.3, 3.4, 1.4. So the projections for the taxes coming into the state into the future, at least in the next couple of years, is not going up. It's coming down. And so as we do the budget, again, I just want to make sure that we all have exercised some caution, that we're not overcommitting ongoing expenses into the future when the tax revenue may not be there 2 years from now.
Anything you wanted to add, Tony, about the surplus?
Well, I kind of want to emphasize, so you just heard the percentage increases that we're going to see in the next 3 years as far as growth, revenue growth. I want to emphasize the growth that we had during the COVID years, and to Howard's point, the $67 billion that came from the federal government to the state of Wisconsin. So you heard Howard talk about the numbers, 4.2, 3.7, and then the 1.4. In 2021, that number was 9.6. In 2022, it was 9.2. In 2023, it's 6.8. So my emphasis on that is you could see just how that money came down from the feds and how we as Wisconsinites, we spent that money, and we see that in our growth rates during that time, the tax collections. I mean, they were huge. And now we're going to be back to a very normal pace of, the 4.2s, the 3.5, and that's why as we build a budget moving forward, we got to just be very cautious about the growth, and it's going to be more of a realistic growth number that we're going to see throughout.
Not relevant maybe so much for our state, but any idea of other states and how they're dealing with things and, their surpluses?
Well, it's interesting. So Howard and I, being state legislators, we belong to the National Council of State Legislators, and it's basically a nationwide, and they look at comparisons of other states. A lot of our states, for their 2026 budget cycle, the end of theirs, they are looking at pretty significant structural deficits. I think some of the states are almost $5 billion, $6 billion structural deficits, and so they're going to have a rude awakening. Whereas, Wisconsin is in actually a very strong position. We haven't created these large structural deficits by basically taking one-time money and putting that into our base budget. We've been very responsible, and so we've got to be cautious about that. But some of these other states around us, like in Illinois, like a Minnesota, which is Minnesota had a last budget cycle. They had a $17 billion surplus. At the end of this budget cycle, they're looking at a $6 billion deficit. So that's why we've got to be very cautious about what we do. We've been very prudent. Some states have not.
Yeah, and I attend some national meetings on this stuff, on the budgets and stuff, and we are compared to the rest of the country, we're in good shape. We really are. And I think there are states, and in Minnesota, Tony mentioned Minnesota. Money was coming in, great, and they spent it. They added programs and that sort of thing. And in the short term, it probably looks good. But and I in putting the budget together, I want to make sure that we not only can afford it in the short term, in the next biennium, but sitting here 2 years from now, that we're not setting ourselves up for failure in the next budget. We always got to look at this budget, not in. And sometimes I think there's a tendency to do that. Just look in, a budget, you got enough money to fund it for this 2-year period, but I also want to take a look at the next couple of years. So one thing we should probably talk about, we've been talking about taxes coming in and all that going up, but the spending side of things is not good, and we call it the cost to continue. These are expenditures for Medicaid, for example, going up dramatically. So you're talking cost to continue into the future, $2.26 billion, which is it's high. It's very high, and the bulk of that is medical assistance, the MA program. So, revenue going up. Boy, our expenses too are going up into the future, and a lot of those costs to continue, we have no control over them. It's like your utility bill. What are you going to? You got to pay it, So anyway, we got to be careful. And again, I was look at not just the next 2-year budget, but how does the following 2-year budget? What does that look like?
We'll come back with more from Howard Marklein and Tony Kurtz after these words on the morning show. Welcome back to our morning show studio here. We have State Senator Howard Marklein, and we have Tony Kurtz here. Tony representing Wisconsin's 41st Assembly District. So welcome back to our morning show visit here today. Tony, how's the farm climate right now? How's it looking?
It's kind of up in the air. I was talking, matter of fact, I was in the Linden Station Fire Department. They had a wonderful corned beef and cabbage fundraiser for their fire department, and I was sitting next to, his name's Ernie Giebel. He's a cattle rancher farmer up by Linden Station, and we were going by cattle prices, and he's pretty happy with cattle prices. But then on the other flip side, you can talk to somebody that's either dairy or grain. They're not doing too good right now. So it's up in the air. But I think every spring, Howard talked about it. You smell the fresh manure, and spring is in the air, and before you know it, people are going to be planting and getting giddy about it. And I know I'm kind of getting that way as well. So.
You're right. In the public, what's the feeling about all the tariffs and all that talk that
it's interesting. I have not. Obviously you see that on nightly news, and I'm sure people here and there, but I have not had people come up to me and say, "Hey, well, how's this going to do it?" I think people kind of now are waiting and seeing, and I think I'm kind of in that mode too. Let's just wait and see what, in fact, I think a lot of this is kind of posturing, but we'll see. So, Howard?
Yeah, I was at in Lafayette County last week at a farmer-led watershed group meeting, their annual meeting. And there's probably 50 farmers there or so. So I had a chance to talk to a lot of the farmers, and I asked them, one-on-one, so how are things? How are things in the farm? I'll tell you what, I did not hear one negative comment from the farmers, and overall, he said, dairy, we're doing fine, kind of thing. So, and I asked him about the tariffs and stuff, and he said, you know what, we've been through this stuff before, and these are farmers that have probably been around for a while. They're not 24 years old, and of course, this time of year, I think farmers are eternal optimists. It's going to be a good year. We're going to have good growing weather and all that. So, I was kind of surprised too that there wasn't nearly as much concern. Again, we were talking about farmers, one-on-one. But again, and that's a group of pretty good farmers. They were, they're pretty good operators, and they've been through a lot. And I was talking to a farmer just a little bit younger than me a month or so ago, and about the weather. He worried about it being dry and stuff, and he said, we've been through this before. It'll rain eventually, and we'll, so. And I think when you've been around long enough, you understand these are cycles, and to Tony's his comment, on just wait and see. I think that's probably good advice at this point because, I hear from constituents saying, about what about what's going on in Washington? And the thing is, we don't know. I don't have any inside information, and we don't. So let's, we have to wait and see what happens. And it probably is, posturing, and I think, and we'll have to just wait and see. So, but getting back to the farmers, I guess like I said, I have not heard any cries recently. I think in the recent past, I heard more concerns than I'm hearing right now.
Mm-hmm. Also, concerns about cuts to Medicaid programs and things like that. Have you heard anything?
No, and that's something, I've sat down with all my ADRC directors in our area, and they've made me very aware of what those the ramifications of those. And so I appreciate their feedback and the value of those. But once again, I kind of go back, let's kind of see where we're going to be at and what in fact does, if anything. I think, once again, you just kind of got to wait and see. I know the value, obviously Richland County Medicaid is, probably touches about 26% of Richland County. So it's a huge part. Juneau County is actually 28%. So it does something that does affect our area. But once again, let's just kind of wait and see. I know human nature is to, and obviously once you turn the news on, everything is negative. Let's just wait and see and control what we can control in our own area.
So on the ADRCs, they do great work. And these are services provided predominantly to our senior citizens. Okay, and all over my district, they just do incredible work, and I'm so grateful for them. And one of the things I wanted to bring up was in the last budget, because of the great work that they do, we increased their funding by 10%. Okay, and so here I think it's Eagle Country of Wisconsin that covers Richland County, Juneau County, Crawford County. Okay, so in the last month or so, we're talking to some of our ADRCs about how much more they could do with this additional funding. 10% increase in the budget last year. Do you know how much they got here for Eagle Country? Zero. They had no increase whatsoever. And what happened was the Department of Health Services changed the metrics on how they allocate this money. And so they added in a couple things on, in addition to age. It used to be distributed around the state predominantly based on the age of your population. The older your counties, the more money you got, which makes sense since that's a service for. They also added in ethnicity and race into the formula. So where did all the money go? Milwaukee, and which is just very frustrating. Because again, our local ADRCs, they do great work, and it's just very frustrating to understand or find out that they didn't get any increase whatsoever. So we've talked to Department of Health Services, and again, it was kind of like with the cut scores with education. I mean, the rules were changed in the middle of the stream and without telling anybody. I wasn't aware of this till a month or so ago.
Tony, anything you wanted to add?
No, and once again, this is interesting when we have these conversations in Madison about how I was literally having this conversation the other day about the east side of the state and the west side of the state, and how, obviously everybody thinks there's such a disagreement between Republicans and Democrats, and there is. I'm not going to say there isn't, but there's also a big difference between some of my Republican colleagues that represent, the eastern side of the state versus, us on the western side of the state. It's like we're when it comes back to road funding or broadband or ADRCs, it's like they don't realize that rural communities need just as much as they have in the cities outside of Waukesha and Milwaukee. We have the same needs, and it's just a matter of making sure we have a seat at the table and say, hey, we need this just as much as you need it on the eastern side of the state. And the interesting thing about, as you look at especially the Joint Finance Committee, I said this last cycle too, the makeup of the Joint Finance Committee over the last several budgets has been a lot more rural legislators, and that actually, as some people may not understand this, but our budgets actually have been, over the last several budgets, a little bit more rural-centric to realize we need funding out here, just like you need it over on the eastern side of the state. And so we're going to continue to do that, especially when you talk about our ADRCs, our roads, schools. But, we got work to do. But it's interesting, the dynamics down in Madison about just our little struggles we have with our members on the east side and the west side.
Accessibility and affordability of healthcare too. We kind of touched on that a little bit, but I know that's one of your goals, Howard.
Yeah, and we have. I've got a lot of hospitals. I've got a lot of nursing homes in my district, and I'll be visiting with a nursing home shortly here after I leave. And so they're they got challenges. I mean, their costs too have increased dramatically, and our rural hospitals are so important to our rural communities. They are. You got to have we got to have good health care here. So anyway, as we get into the budget, I'm going to be advocating for like I said, our nursing homes. And as well as our hospitals, and there's a tie there too, because we've got situations. We still have situations where the hospitals have patients that are ready to be discharged, but they don't have a place to send them. Okay, there aren't any slots available for at the nursing home, so we need to make sure that continuum is working. Because otherwise, patients are sitting in a expensive hospital setting, incredible costs, and a lot of these are Medicaid or Medicare patients, and costing taxpayers a lot of money. We need to get them into other facilities that are more reasonable in cost, and better for them. I think people want to get out of the probably hospital as soon as they can.
Mm-hmm. We hear about hospitals closing. We have here in the past couple of years in the state.
Well, and that's where I think, to Howard's point about making sure when we talk about rural healthcare and just rural in general, obviously the hospital here is a critical access. That is incredibly important when you look at our region. Critical access are basically hospitals below the size of 25 beds. If you think about why you want to have a critical access hospital, is basically those you got a hospital right here in this community, and where's the next one? I mean, obviously the next one's going to be Madison. So that's why critical access is so key, but also part of that is staffing. When Howard talks about they don't have enough bed capacity in the nursing homes, they have the bed capacity. It's just they don't have the staffing because they have very rigorous regulations they have to follow, and they have to have the staff to have people in those beds. Well, if you don't have the staff, obviously you can't occupy those beds, and that's kind of where we're getting at with some of the hospitals. Is we are getting very short on staff. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's a CNA, it doesn't matter if it's a nurse anesthetist, it doesn't matter if it's a general surgeon or a family practitioner. We are short, and that's where I think as we look over the next couple budgets, and we've done this for especially healthcare professionals, we've actually incentivized them in many ways to practice in a rural setting by giving scholarships, helping pay for their college, things like that. But it's also getting students involved. The other day, I toured Waniwak Union Center School, and they're offering CNA courses. They had 8 CNAs last year complete their class down at the high school level. They opened up to Hillsboro. They opened it up to another high school to join them to do the CNA classes. But the point is they're getting more kids involved at the high school level, where a lot of these kids are ready to go as soon as they graduate, and then they can pursue a career later if they want to get into nursing or et cetera. But I give our schools a lot of credit because they're recognizing the need for those healthcare jobs, and they're first of all, they're great jobs. They're very rewarding, but they are so sorely needed.
Howard, I know we wanted to recognize an area man that I think it's posthumously, but somebody from our district that has done pretty well over the years.
Yeah. So David Martin lived recently in the Muscoda area, and David Martin was a legislator from the Fox Valley area. Neenah, I believe, is where he served for several terms in the state legislature. And so after his tenure representing that area, he relocated to Southwest Wisconsin, was very active in the community down here. And anyway, he passed away recently, and so tomorrow on the floor we're going to be recognizing him with a resolution, which is done for any legislator who passes away. But he was again very active. I saw him at lots and lots of events in the area, and just a good guy. And he served the state well, and he served his community well.
So you'll be on the Senate floor tomorrow, then?
We will. Yes. So we'll be taking up that. I don't have the whole list of bills that we're going to be taking up. Probably the most substantive one that we'll be taking up is the bill that we talked about already, and that has to do with the school accountability. Going back, it's the same bill that the Assembly passed, and going back to the standards that existed for the last year. I don't know how many years, a couple of decades, I think. So going back to those that baseline.
What's up next for you, Tony?
Well, tomorrow we're going to be on the Assembly floor tomorrow. Again on Thursday, Wednesday. There's a lot of committee hearings. So once again, we are in full session and hitting the ground running and doing a lot of interesting things at the Capitol.
When you come back next month, you'll probably have you will have had the plow on the ground, maybe.
I'm hoping. I actually was working on it the other day.
Is that right? Getting ready.
I was working on it.
And we'll see you in a couple of months, Howard.
Yes, you will. Thank you.
So thanks for coming in today.
Yeah,
thanks for having us, Phil.
You bet. State Senator Howard Marklein and Tony Kurtz representing the 41st Assembly District here in our Richland Center WRCO listening area. We'll have more coming up tomorrow on the morning show. We'll talk to some FFA students right here in the studios.